They made me Jake, she whispered. They pinned me to the ground, and they took turns. I begged them to stop, but they wouldn't listen. How it all started. I wasn't supposed to be home that night. The job had me on the road, working long hours to close a deal in Denver. I told my wife, Emily, I wouldn't be back until Friday. But the client signed early, so I caught a red eye to surprise her. I wanted to see the look on her face when I walked through the door unannounced. She always said she loved surprises. The house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway at midnight. Too quiet. Normally, Emily would leave a light on for me, even if I was away. But tonight, the place was dark except for a faint glow coming from the living room window. My first thought was that she'd fallen asleep watching TV again. I smiled, imagining her curled up under a blanket, a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table. But when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the smile vanished. The living room was empty. No blanket, no wine, just the muffled sound of voices coming from upstairs. I froze, my gut twisting into knots. Emily's voice floated down, followed by a man's laughter. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, flirty, intimate, the kind of tone she used to reserve for me. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself I was hearing things. Maybe it was the TV. Maybe she had a friend over. But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what I was about to walk into. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. When I reached our bedroom, the door was cracked open, just enough for me to see inside. And there they were, Emily, on our bed, tangled up with a man I didn't recognize. His hands were all over her, and she was laughing, her head thrown back like she didn't have a care in the world. My Emily, the woman I'd married, the woman I'd trusted with everything. It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For a second, I thought I might pass out. But then the anger hit, hot, blinding, and all-consuming. I pushed the door open, and they both froze, their eyes snapping to me like deer caught in headlights. What the hell is this? I barked, my voice shaking with rage. Emily scrambled off the bed, grabbing the sheet to cover herself. Jake, I didn't. This isn't, she stammered, her face pale. The guy, some wiry, smug-looking jerk with a bad haircut, just sat there, his hands raised like he thought I might hit him. And believe me, I was tempted. Get out, I snarled, pointing to the door. Now! The guy didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his clothes and bolted, nearly tripping over himself in his hurry to escape. That left just me and Emily standing there in the wreckage of our marriage. The anger gave me clarity, sharp and focused. I wasn't about to let her spin this, to weasel her way out of what I'd just seen. How long? I demanded, my voice like ice. Jake, please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It was a mistake. I never meant for you to find out how long. I took a step closer, and she flinched. A few months, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But it didn't mean anything. I swear it didn't mean anything. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Didn't mean anything? You're sleeping with another man in our bed, Emily. The bed I built with my own 2 hands. And you're telling me it doesn't mean anything? She sobbed harder, dropping to her knees like she thought it might make me pity her. I am sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry. It was stupid, and I hate myself for it. Please just give me a chance to make this right. Her words were like gasoline on the fire inside me. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she just inflicted on me. But instead, I forced myself to take a deep breath and step back. I trusted you, I said, my voice breaking. I gave you everything, Emily, and this is how you repay me? I love you, she sobbed. I do. I never stopped loving you. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare say that. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. She didn't respond, just sat there on the floor, shaking and crying. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house, not with her. I ended up at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like dishwater. The waitress kept giving me sympathetic looks, but I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to think. I just wanted to disappear. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the image out of my head. Emily laughing with that man like I never existed. Like the past 10 years of our marriage had meant nothing. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But now it was mixed with something else, something colder and heavier. Betrayal, sadness, loss. I thought about the life we'd built together, the memories we'd shared, the plans we'd made for the future. And I realized none of it had been real. Not to her. I wanted to call someone, to tell them what had happened, but who? My parents would just worry. My friends would either pity me or tell me to cut her loose. None of it would help. None of it would make this pain go away. I was alone. By the time I returned home, the sun was just starting to rise, casting an eerie glow on the house that no longer felt like mine. I'd spend hours at that diner, trying to make sense of everything, but there were still questions gnawing at me. The most painful one, why? Emily was sitting on the couch when I walked in, still in the same clothes or lack of them from the night before. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot. She'd clearly been crying the entire time I was gone, but I wasn't about to let that sway me. Not after what I'd seen. "You're still here," I said coldly, dropping my keys on the table. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. "Jake, please let me explain." I folded my arms, leaning against the wall. "You've got 5 minutes. Make it good." She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't plan it. It just happened. It just happened." I scoffed. "That's your excuse? You don't accidentally fall into bed with someone for months, Emily." "It wasn't about you," she cried, standing up and pacing the room. "I know that's hard to believe, but it wasn't. I've been lost. Stuck. I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're a liar and a cheater," I said, my voice like ice. "That's who you are." Her head snapped toward me, and for the first time, I saw something other than guilt in her eyes. I saw anger. "You think you're perfect?" She shot back. "You're never here, Jake. You're always working, always putting your job ahead of me. I've been lonely." "Oh, so it's my fault now?" I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "You didn't seem so lonely when you were spending my money on vacations and dinners and God knows what else." "That's not fair," she snapped. "I didn't ask for this life, Jake. You built it and dragged me along." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I didn't respond, just stared at her, trying to decide if I even recognized the woman standing in front of me. But then something clicked. "You said a few months," I said, my voice low. "Was that a lie too?" She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Jake, how long, Emily?" I demanded, stepping closer. "How long have you been screwing around behind my back?" She looked away, and I knew the answer before she said it. "Almost 2 years," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt the air leave my lungs. 2 years. 2 years of lies, of betrayal, of her smiling in my face while she shared our life with someone else. And then she said something that stopped me cold. "It wasn't just one person," she said, her voice shaking. "There were others." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the words. "Others? What the hell does that mean, Emily?" She sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "It wasn't about sex," she said. "It was about feeling alive. I was drowning, Jake, and I didn't know how to tell you." I laughed bitterly, pacing the room. "So your solution was to sleep with every guy who gave you attention?" "Jesus Christ, Emily." "It's not like that," she said, her voice desperate. "It was never about love. It was just an escape." "An escape from what?" I shouted. "From me? From our marriage? From the life we built together?" Before she could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. I ignored it, but it buzzed again. And again. Finally, I grabbed it, ready to snap at whoever was on the other end. But when I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a message from an unknown number. A picture of Emily, naked in our bedroom. And below it, a caption, "You deserve to know the truth." "What the hell is this?" I demanded, shoving the phone in her face. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I don't know," she stammered. "I swear, Jake, I didn't send that." "Then who did?" I said, my voice rising. "Who the hell has pictures of you like this, Emily?" She didn't answer, just stared at the screen, her face as pale as a ghost. And that's when it hit me. "There's more to this, isn't there?" I said, stepping closer. "You didn't just cheat on me. You let them take pictures. Videos. What else, Emily? What the hell else are you hiding?" She didn't deny it. She just started crying again, and that was all the confirmation I needed. The messages kept coming, one after another. Pictures, screenshots of texts, even a video. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through them, each image more humiliating than the last. And then I saw the name of the sender, Mike Simmons. My stomach dropped. Mike Simmons was one of my oldest friends, someone I'd trusted with everything. He'd been to our house for dinner, spent holidays with us, and now he was sending me evidence that he'd been sleeping with my wife. Mike? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You were sleeping with Mike? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Jake, I can explain. No, I said, cutting her off. You can't. You can't explain this. You can't fix this. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, but she followed me, grabbing my arm. Please don't go, she begged. We can get through this. I'll do anything, Jake. Just don't leave. I turned to face her, my jaw clenched. You already lost me, Emily, I said, and now you've lost everything else too. I walked out, slamming the door behind me, leaving her sobbing in the hallway. But as I drove away, one thought kept running through my mind. If Mike had the guts to send me those messages, what else was he planning to do? I spent the night in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, trying to piece together the wreckage of my life. The messages from Mike haunted me, each one a fresh blow to my pride. I couldn't understand why he'd sent them. Was it guilt? Arrogance? Or something worse? By the time the sun came up, I had more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal, no matter how much it hurt. I started with Mike. I hadn't responded to his text the night before, but now I was ready. I called him, my fingers shaking as I dialed. He picked up on the first ring. Jake, he said, his voice cautious. I figured I'd hear from you. Yeah, no kidding. Isnapat. What the hell, Mike? Why would you send me those messages? Do you enjoy kicking a man when he's down? There was a long pause before he spoke again. You needed to know the truth. The truth? I laughed bitterly. The truth is you slept with my wife. And you're acting like you did me a favor by rubbing it in my face. I'm not the only one, Jake, he said quietly. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? He hesitated, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. Look, man, I'm sorry. I really am. But Emily didn't just cheat with me. There were others. A lot of others. I felt my grip tighten on the phone. How many? I don't know, he admitted. But I know for a fact it wasn't just me. She's been with most of the guys in our group. Our friends. The people I trusted with everything. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. Mike's voice broke through my thoughts. She's been sleeping with Matt, he said. And Derek. And probably Kyle too. Kyle. My best friend since college. The guy who'd stood next to me on my wedding day, grinning like an idiot as I said my vows. The thought of him touching Emily made me feel sick. I hung up without another word, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a massacre. I drove straight home, not caring if Emily was still there. The anger inside me was a live wire, sparking and crackling with every beat of my heart. I didn't care about being calm or reasonable anymore. I wanted answers. She was in the kitchen when I burst through the door, her face pale and tears streaked. Jake, how many? I barked, cutting her off. How many of my friends did you screw, Emily? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't know, what are you talking about? Don't play dumb. I snapped, slamming my hands on the counter. Mike told me everything. Matt, Derek, Kyle. How many others? Were there more? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But instead, she shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Jake, please, I didn't mean for this to happen. Stop. I growled. Just stop. I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. Did you sleep with them? She hesitated for a second too long, and that was all the confirmation I needed. You did, I said, my voice trembling with rage. You slept with all of them. It didn't mean anything, she cried, her voice desperate. I was lonely, Jake. They were just there. I wasn't thinking. You weren't thinking. I laughed bitterly. You weren't thinking while you destroyed everything we had? While you turned my friends into a damn punchline? I never wanted to hurt you, she said, her voice cracking. I love you, Jake. I always have. Bullshit, I spat. You don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to my face for years while you screwed every guy I trusted. She sobbed, but I didn't care. The woman I'd loved, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. In her place was a stranger, a manipulative, deceitful stranger who'd burned my life to the ground. Just as I was about to walk out the door again, my phone buzzed. It was another message, this time from Matt. Jake, we need to talk. It's about Emily. I stared at the screen, my stomach sinking. What more could there possibly be? I called him, my anger barely contained. What do you want? I snapped when he answered. Jake, he said, his voice low. You need to know something. Emily's not who you think she is. No kidding, I said bitterly. She's a liar and a cheater. What else is new? It's not just that, he said. She's been blackmailing us. That stopped me cold. What are you talking about? She's been using what happened to get things from us, he said. Money, favors, promotions. She threatened to tell our wives if we didn't go along with it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just infidelity. It was manipulation on a level I hadn't even considered. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd exploited my friends, turning them into pawns in her sick game. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice shaking. Because she said you wouldn't believe us, he admitted. And honestly, Jake, we were scared. She's ruthless. I hung up without responding, my mind racing. Emily hadn't just cheated. She destroyed lives, and for what? Power? Control? The need to feel superior? I couldn't get Matt's words out of my head as I drove aimlessly through town, the phone call replaying over and over in my mind. Blackmail? Emily ruthless? It didn't add up. Emily wasn't perfect. Far from it, but ruthless? Manipulative? That wasn't the woman I'd married. She didn't have the stomach for it. Something about Matt's story felt off. But how could I trust her either? After everything I'd seen, everything I'd been told, how could I believe a single word out of her mouth? I knew there was only one way to get the truth. I had to confront her again. This time, I wouldn't let her dodge my questions. But when I stormed back into the house, I found her sitting on the couch, her face pale and her hands trembling. You're back, she said softly, her voice hoarse from crying. I just talked to Matt, I said, my tone hard. He told me you've been blackmailing them, threatening to ruin their lives if they didn't give you what you wanted. Money favors what? She interrupted, her eyes widening in shock. That's not true, isn't it? I demanded, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you've been playing all of us for fools. So tell me, Emily, what's the real story? For a moment, she just stared at me, her lower lip trembling. And then, to my surprise, she let out a bitter laugh. You want the truth? She said, her voice shaking. Fine, I'll give you the truth. But you're not going to like it. She took a deep breath, her hands clutching the edge of the couch, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. It happened almost 2 years ago. She began, her voice barely above a whisper. The night of Matt's bachelor party. I froze. I remembered that night. Matt had insisted on a wild, booze-fueled party at some dive bar on the edge of town. Emily and I had argued about it. She didn't think I should go, but I brushed off her concerns. I didn't realize she'd ended up there herself. I wasn't supposed to be there, she continued, tears streaming down her face. But you were drunk, and you left your wallet at home. I went to bring it to you, and when I got there, they were already hammered. Matt, Mike, Derek, all of them. Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. They said I looked too good to be your wife, that I was wasting myself on you. I tried to leave, but they wouldn't let me. My stomach churned, the pieces starting to click together. What are you saying, Emily? I asked, my voice trembling. They forced me, Jake, she whispered. They pinned me down and they took turns. I begged them to stop, but they wouldn't listen. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, knocking the air from my lungs. I stumbled back, sinking into a chair as the weight of her confession settled over me. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely audible. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of shame and fear. Because they threatened me, she said. They said if I told anyone, they'd ruin me. They'd tell everyone in town that I came on to them, that I was a whore. And I believed them, Jake. I was scared. Her voice grew steadier as she continued. the dam finally breaking. It didn't stop there. After that night, they kept coming back. They'd show up at the house when you weren't home, or they'd corner me at the grocery store. They said if I didn't do what they wanted, they'd tell everyone. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could protect you, but I couldn't. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The men I'd called my friends, the people I'd trusted most, had done this. And Emily, my wife, had been living in fear, carrying this secret alone for years. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice cracking. I hated myself for not telling you, but I didn't know what else to do. And then when you caught me with Mike, I thought you'd hate me. I thought you believed them. I buried my face in my hands, my mind reeling. Every interaction with Matt, Mike, Derek, they all took on a new, sickening meaning. The smug smiles, the sly comments, the way they'd acted like they were in on some private joke. They weren't just betraying me. They were tormenting her. Emily fell silent, her sobs filling the room. I didn't know what to say, what to think. A part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault. But another part of me burned with rage, not at her, but at them. They're not going to get away with this, I said finally, my voice low and steady. I'll make sure of it. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted. But they're not going to keep you in their web. They're not going to hurt you anymore. Her lip quivered, and she nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I just wanted to stop, she whispered. I want to feel safe again. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. I said, I promise. In the days following Emily's confession, I felt like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My mind churned with rage, disgust, and an overwhelming sense of failure. How had I missed this? How had I let her suffer alone for so long? But if there was one thing I knew, it was this: I wasn't going to let those bastards get away with what they'd done. They'd taken so much from us, her sense of safety, our marriage, my trust in people. It was time to take something from them. The first step was finding a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, someone experienced in cases like this. I hired Andrea Collins, a fierce woman who specialized in prosecuting sexual violence. Emily was hesitant at first, terrified of the shame and humiliation the process might bring. But Andrea reassured her. You don't have to carry this burden alone, she said. We'll fight for you, and we'll win. Andrea worked quickly, gathering evidence and preparing Emily to give her statement. I hadn't realized how much these men had left a trail of destruction until we started digging. Text messages, emails, even surveillance footage from the bar where it all began. Every piece of evidence painted a damning picture of their guilt. The hardest part was when Emily had to recount everything in detail to Andrea and the detectives. She broke down several times, but she never gave up. Watching her face those memories with courage broke my heart, but it also made me proud. Within weeks, Matt, Mike, Derek, and the others were arrested. When the police showed up at Matt's house, I made sure to be there, standing across the street as they let him out in handcuffs. He spotted me and smirked, as if this were just another game to him. You think this changes anything? He shouted. No one will believe her. Everyone knows she's a shut-up, one of the officers barked, shoving him into the car. It took everything I had not to charge at him right then and there, but I knew better. Violence wouldn't solve this. Violence was how this had started. Instead, I turned and walked away, feeling a small sense of relief for the first time in weeks. The trial was grueling. Emily's character was questioned, her choices dissected, her pain laid bare for everyone to see. But she held her head high, refusing to let them silence her. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every woman who had been told it was her fault, for every victim too scared to speak out. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on all counts. Each of them received lengthy prison sentences, enough to ensure they wouldn't be free for decades. When the verdict was read, Emily broke down in my arms, sobbing with a mix of relief and exhaustion. It's over, she whispered. It's finally over. After the trial, we knew we couldn't stay in the same town. Too many memories, too many judgmental stares from people who had swallowed the lies Matt and the others had spread. So we packed up and moved to a quiet town a few states away, where no one knew us or our past. Emily started seeing a psychologist, Dr. Karen Lewis, who specialized in trauma therapy. At first, she resisted. "I don't need help," she insisted. "I just want to forget." But forgetting wasn't the answer. Healing was. And Dr. Lewis helped her take those first painful steps toward reclaiming her life. I started seeing a therapist too. As much as I wanted to be strong for Emily, I couldn't ignore the anger simmering inside me. It wasn't just at the men who had hurt her. It was at myself for not seeing the signs, for not protecting her when she needed me most. My therapist helped me realize that blaming myself wouldn't help either of us. What mattered now was being there for her, for us, as we built something new together. One of the hardest lessons I've learned through all of this is that violence isn't just physical, it's psychological, emotional, and societal. What happened to Emily wasn't her fault. It wasn't because of how she dressed, or because she was too friendly, or any of the other excuses people love to throw around. It happened because a group of men decided they had the right to take what wasn't theirs. The world loves to blame victims, to question their choices instead of holding perpetrators accountable. But that blame is misplaced. No one deserves to be hurt, no matter what. And it's never too late to seek justice, no matter how much fear or shame might stand in the way. It's been a year since the trial, and things are slowly getting better. Emily and I still have a long way to go, but we're stronger now than we were before. She's rediscovering who she is, beyond what happened to her, and I'm learning how to let go of the anger that nearly consumed me. We're taking it one day at a time. Some days are harder than others, but there are moments, small, quiet moments, when I see the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. And I know we'll be okay. To anyone reading this, if you've been hurt, if you're carrying a secret that feels too heavy to share, know this, you're not alone. There's help out there, and there are people who will believe you. Don't let fear keep you silent. Speak up, fight back, and most importantly, never forget that what happened to you is not your fault.